Sera's dying, Marcus. The whole planet's infected couldn't have been a more clear warning about the emulsion currently plaguing humans and Locust alike. This once touted savior of the humans to combat their growing energy needs would turn out to be something much more malevolent than they ever knew. It would spark a war with the Locust underground that would annihilate most of the population and leave it in shambles. But what exactly does the emulsion do to the body, whether it be human or Locust? Well, let's take a look, shall we? In this episode, we cover the emulsion's lore and morphology. First things first, let's start from the beginning to understand how Humans of Sera even found the stuff. Roughly a little over 100 years prior to E-Day, a rig was searching for oil, which existed deep within the crust of Sera. During their search, they inadvertently found emulsion locked away in the crust. Originally, it had no use, so it was regarded more of just an oddity or scientific curiosity than anything. Eventually, however, a refining technique was discovered that allowed the emulsion to be burned to produce energy. This energy was clean, inexpensive, and abundant. Due to this, it immediately became the fuel of choice for society. However, this benefactor to the Serans would ultimately produce struggles much greater than any energy crisis. It began with the miners who descended underground to find the emulsion and process it. A cough here, a sprinkling of lethargy there, very clear immune responses by the body. Originally, nobody could figure out why the miners were becoming ill, or maybe really they didn't want to look into it. Eventually though, the miners began to spread this illness to their immediate family, and it became clear whatever it was contagious. The miners and their families were gathered up and shipped out to the New Hope facility. The New Hope facility was putting off some really bad mojo though. Here, the initial intent was to cure this new sickness and learn about it, but eventually it became more about just studying the disease and conducting experiments. The families of the infected miners were put into camps and studied. The infected adults would become the sires that we see in the tanks that also attack anybody on sight, whereas the children with the altered DNA and mutations would go on to become the Locust. Eventually, New Hope became a liability to the COG, so it was shut down and classified, with the specimens moved up the mountains and underground, where they stayed for over a century. The ability of the emulsion, even by secondhand exposure, shows how mutagenic it is to any life form that it comes into contact with, but mostly the emulsion still exists under the ground at this point, but it wouldn't stay there. As humanity prospered, unaware of the disease this emulsion could cause, mainly due to the cover-up of their government, there would be a crash on the price of emulsion. Due to this, the pendulum wars were sparked as the COG fought the UIR. When this bloody, massive conflict concluded, humanity was greatly weakened. War caused many refugees to be abundant, fighting forces were drained, and distrust of the COG still reigned supreme. At the worst possible point, roughly 6 weeks later, the Locusts emerged on E-Day. The exhausted forces of humanity reeled from the attack and lost battle after battle. Many soldiers of the dwindling forces were game-ended early in these battles, and humanity was pushed to the brink of extinction. In an effort to stop this, humans used the Hammer of Dawn to crush the Locusts to some degree, but lost even more people in the process, liking it almost to the Russians setting fire to their own cities during the winter to deny the enemy safe habitation. It's essentially a scorched earth policy. Fast forward, humanity is struggling with the Locust invasion, and at this point they just happen upon a new form of Locust, the lambent wretch. These wretches were more aggressive, explosive, and glowed yellow. Little did they know this would become the standard enemy they would be fighting. After mapping the Locust tunnels, the light mass bomb was dropped, which ended up aerosolizing a lot of emulsion and wounding the Locust war machine greatly. This is where we begin to take notice of the emulsion's ability to infect. Soon after, cases of this new disease known as rustlung began popping up all over the planet. The aerosolized emulsion was inhaled and began to break down the lungs of a person. In most cases, the phlegm would be coughed up and would be brown and red in color, suggesting a deconstructing effect in the lungs. This would obviously be detrimental to any person and lead to their eventual demise. The hemorrhaging seen in the lungs is just the beginning of a much worse progression. The emulsion was moving into the cells of a person and then there began rewriting their DNA. The Locusts at this point were not faring much better than humanity. Underground, they were fighting a desperate civil war with the Lambent Locusts, and they were losing. This drove them to the surface more often than not, and seemingly as the months passed, the Lambent would virtually take over the entire hollow and the tunnels, pushing pockets of Locusts to bands of disorganization on the surface. At this point, the Lambent War became humanity's war also. What was left of the COG forces would join in the fighting of the Lambent, but not as allies. Instead, it was a three-sided war for everyone. This caused the population to plummet even further. Humanity would spread the effects of the emulsion in an attempt to stop the Locusts at this point as well. Upon sinking Jacinto, they introduced the sea to a large emulsion patch. With no ground to separate the two, the emulsion would leak out into the oceans, and here the infection of the planet was almost certain. Oceans became contaminated with emulsion, which presumably would backtrack into the fresh water as well. This would make these sources of water contaminated, which would then be introduced into the body of a person. Entire towns became converted by the effects of rustlung and turned into formers while this was going on. Formers are humans who survived the initial stages of the infection of emulsion as it reproduced in their bodies, eventually mutating them to the point of glowing eyes and veins. They would become more like rabid monsters and attack Locust and Human on sight, completely forgetting about their former lives. Luckily, at this time, Adam Phoenix, Marcus's father, had already begun working on a cure, but it wouldn't come too soon. Due to the infectivity of the emulsion and its ability to jump species, every single person, whether they were human or Locust, had emulsion in their cells. It was rewriting everyone's DNA slowly, but would eventually convert the entire planet to lambent. Adam developed a machine that would destroy the emulsion and activated it. It appears that it would be able to destroy the emulsion no matter the amount that was in the cells, but those saturated with the emulsion would also be destroyed if it was too much. As such, Adam was ended in the process and turned to ash. Humanity hadn't been infected so long, so it was cleared from their cells, while the Locusts suffered complete extinction due to their cells containing a large amount of this emulsion. The lambent would be utterly decimated and turned to ash. So now that we know the lore of the emulsion and the humans' ham-fisted attempt to turn everything into fuel that it can, let's discuss what it actually is. Emulsion is a highly volatile, low-viscosity fluid that, as we all know, is used as fuel. But unlike coal, oil, natural gas, or any of the other fossil fuels the Serans presumably used, this particular fuel is still alive and extremely parasitic. It is not fully known where emulsion came from, but it is entirely possible that it originated on the planet initially long ago, judging by its location underground. And also, interestingly, much like the fungus in The Last of Us, there is potential for this to be a fungus as well. This mentality can be seen by the lambent stalks. These stalks are seen as fruiting bodies and rapidly grow from the ground. These stalks release the lambent contained inside, and these will go out and then attempt to convert more to Team Lambent. So actually, look at the stalks as a form of reproduction, if you will. Anyhow, let's discuss medically what happens when the emulsion that was aerosolized enters the body of a person. We have discussed the lungs being an issue, but the immune response I find fairly interesting. Your body will attempt to clear the infection as it's clearly a foreign body, but as we all know, funguses do possess the ability to suppress the immune systems of people, and to a certain degree, eventually I suppose they wouldn't have to suppress it. But prior, macrophages would attack the individual emulsion particles. This is exactly what the emulsion wants. Upon being ingested, it will begin to move deeper into the cell, eventually reaching the nucleus. Here, it will fuse with the DNA and begin rewriting the coding. In some cases, these mutations will result in apoptosis, specifically in the lung cells, where we can see the largest results. The red and brown phlegm are the breaking down of cellular material, and it is subsequently coughed back up. It being red indicates the infection has now moved into the blood. Here, every cell the emulsion touches is invaded and altered. As it was transported through the body, some ended up complaining about extreme nausea, and some even exhibited minor bleeding from the ears. This was a clear indicator it was moving into these areas internally, as well as breaching areas of the skin and bursting blood vessels. Another interesting effect that the emulsion has on the body is it suppresses the ability to reproduce. So any of the reproduction cells that you would need to have babies were not doing so hot. But with these small particles enough to invade the cells, they could also get past a major protection that humans have and enjoy, which keeps us alive during times of sickness: the blood-brain barrier. Here, larger organisms aren't able to breach this area, but the emulsion easily passes through, moving into the very neurons of a person. Some of the results were paranoia, aggression, and insomnia. We now begin to see a direct examples of brain chemistry alteration. The emulsion would begin changing the DNA of these neurons, so firing patterns of the brain may become erratic or even stunted to some degree. With this, paranoia arises. Paranoia is simply a symptom just like aggression is, but overall this would cause a person to not seek out help nor want to be taken in. This works to the benefit of the emulsion almost a little too well for it to be random chance, but we will get to that later on. As the emulsion continues to amass in the body, aggression increases and higher thought decreases. This would presumably continue inversely until finally the body is saturated with emulsion. Upon being fully converted, the skin finally starts to show signs of this infection. The skin will turn darker as melanin production increases. This overproduction turns the skin this color, which is pretty standard across the board considering the lambent locust also experienced this change. Glowing yellow veins underneath the surface will seem to pump exclusively emulsion as well. The eyes and mouth of formers and lambent are yellow and glowing, suggesting that the body is almost complete emulsion except for the surface. It does seem to pull in the chest and abdomen cavities for the most part, but it could just be that this is the central mass of the creature and the limbs are not. With lambent locust, we see very different mutations, interestingly. This is more than likely due to exposure levels as well as time with this disease. So presumably if humans didn't shut it down, eventually we would become mutated like this as well. Although it is possible that the locusts exhibit a wide range of mutations due to their already altered DNA. Humans have a fairly similar genetic makeup no matter what you look like, and as such, there are only so many mutations you can have and still be viable for this emulsion. This could be why we only see formers in one type of way way rather than many different versions. The Locust, already having experienced mutations originally from about 100 years previously, had given rise to many different versions of the Locust. As such, we see these mutations amassing differently in their bodies, such as the lambent drones clearly being from drones, gunkers coming from butchers who were larger locusts, and lambent berserkers shockingly coming from berserkers. There are some interesting possibilities concerning the genetic rewrite, though, that may suggest that the Imulsion isn't simply an organism affecting the genetic coding of people at random. It is known that if the body of a person is destroyed and the Imulsion doesn't immediately detonate, then the Imulsion will leave the body and attempt to seek another host. If this were just an unthinking fungus, then why would it do this? Why would it be compelled to do anything at all? Everything would just be by random chance or just because of its presence. So that brings us into it's time for a conspiracy theory, my dude. For a very long time, ever since learning about the Imulsion, I have been trying to figure out exactly what it is and why it exists. I believe the Imulsion is an invasive species, but is actually more than just the sum of its parts. Now, who knows? Maybe this will be confirmed in Gears of War 5, but there is more to Imulsion than meets the eyes. Originally, it turns a species into one type of unthinking, unfeeling vessel for itself. When this plan went awry, the Imulsion was technically destroyed, but I don't believe this is wholly true. The planet itself was infected. As such, when it was destroyed, it simply became a new form. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that the weather is getting worse on Sera, and this is somehow related in retaliation by the Imulsion due to the attack humanity made on it. As such, the threat is not over yet, though it is not able to infect humans currently like it was able to in its previous form. So it is now affecting humans on a global scale rather than on a cellular level. With this mindset, the Imulsion is thinking, which means when it was turning everyone lambent, it was also strategizing its infection as well. It would enter the cell, alter the DNA in a way it wanted, but what I find most interesting about it is why did it not affect people or animals previously? Well, it's because it's almost a defense mechanism. Humans began burning and destroying it. Humans began using it up. So it stands to reason that the Imulsion did all this to stop an aggressor that was destroying it. Had the Serans never messed with the Imulsion in the first place, none of this would have ever happened. Instead, at least in my opinion, based on what we see, we woke up a sentient form that had the ability to end the human species on Sera without them even really understanding that this thing was alive. Essentially, the Imulsion is a highly invasive form of fungus. It enters the body and begins immediately breaking down the cells of the body, altering the genetic coding of the Locust and humans. I believe personally that the Imulsion is also a thinking organism, as exhibited by it leaving the body of an injured host and seeking a new one. The mutations it causes are also very precise and show that it prefers to change a body in a way that's fairly standard, considering the towns that have been infected. I also believe that the Imulsion is still around in some form, altering the planet's weather, causing volatile events as an almost revenge on humanity. But that's going to do it for this episode. I hope everyone enjoyed. Let me know what you think about the Imulsion being sentient down in the comments. Leaving a like would be very bro of you, and if you're new, subbing is a great way to keep up with the channel. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, merchandise, and Patreon links in the description if anybody is interested in that. And I would also like to thank a few of my patrons. It's Not a Spoon, Joseph Givens, Artyom Chornage, The Lone Titan, and Freedom Units 44. Thank you guys for your awesome patronage, and to the rest of my patrons, I thank you as well. You guys will always be cool in my book. Also, if I sounded a little weird, I went out with my fiance last night, and I'm not feeling so great. So that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.